I refused to babysit my sister's kids, so she put them in a taxi and sent them to my place anyway, except the driver delivered them to the wrong address. 3 days later, I got the phone call that completely blew her life apart. Victoria. My sister. From the earliest days, she lived by an unspoken decree. The world existed solely to cater to her whims. I remember it vividly, a childhood spent in her luminous shadow, where she was the undisputed golden child, incapable of misstep. My role? To be perpetually grateful for any meager sliver of our parents' attention. Dorothy and Kenneth, our parents, laid down the law without equivocation. Victoria's desires always, without exception, superseded my own. The better lighting in my room? Hers for the taking. I descended to the damp quiet of the basement. My hard-earned scholarship fund? A phantom, its promise dissolving into the bottomless pit of her tuition. Each concession, every quiet surrender, I accepted with the wide-eyed ignorance of youth. Family, I'd been indoctrinated, demands sacrifice. Victoria was barely 24 when she wed Nathan, a real estate mogul who treated her like royalty, bankrolling her every fantasy without a moment's hesitation. They had 2 children, Olivia, now 8, and Mason, a lively 5-year-old. I cherished those kids with a ferocity that defied all the familial baggage. They were blameless, innocent casualties caught in the wake of adults who should have known better, whose judgment had long been warped. The true unraveling began about a year ago, when Victoria's craving for me time escalated into an insatiable hunger. Her version of self-care involved opulent spa retreats, shopping sprees in Manhattan, and exclusive wine tastings in the Hamptons. She'd telephone, expecting me to drop everything for last-minute childcare, often with less than an hour's notice, utterly disregarding my demanding career as a financial analyst or the quiet dignity of my own life. Far too many times I acquiesced. The pattern became an excruciating burden, a vice tightening around my life. Last month, the breaking point arrived. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was mid-sentence in a crucial presentation for a high-stakes client. My phone vibrated incessantly, a relentless intrusion. Finally, I offered a terse apology and stepped away to answer. "I need you to watch the kids this weekend," she declared, devoid of preamble, her voice ringing with an assumption of immediate compliance. "I can't. I have plans." My voice was strained, barely a whisper. "Cancel them. Nathan booked us a surprise trip to Vermont. We leave tomorrow morning." Her tone was dismissive, non-negotiable. My jaw clenched, a muscle spasming. "Victoria, I'm asking you to find someone else. I have a work commitment I absolutely cannot reschedule." "You're so selfish," she hissed, the accusation sharp enough to cut. "Family is supposed to help family. What could possibly be more important than your niece and nephew?" "This isn't about them," I retorted, my patience finally fraying. "This is about you assuming I have no life of my own." The line went dead. She had hung up on me. I thought that was the end of it, a painful but ultimately resolved confrontation. I was wrong. Saturday morning dawned, cool and crisp. I was preparing for a professional development conference downtown, an event I'd registered for months in advance. The session began at 9. I was reviewing my notes over a solitary cup of coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this the residence of—" The paused. The person who lives at 847 Riverside Drive, apartment 12C?" The voice on the other end was formal, official. My stomach plummeted. "Yes, this is she." "Who's calling?" "This is Officer Garrett Mills with the NYPD. We have 2 minors here who were found alone outside an apartment building. They had a note with this address." Ice flooded my veins. "What? What are you talking about?" "A taxi driver dropped off 2 children, approximately ages 8 and 5, at 847 Riverside Drive, but there's no apartment 12C in that building. The building only goes up to 8 floors. The kids were left on the sidewalk. A neighbor called us when she found them crying." "Wait," I interrupted, a new, horrifying realization dawning. I live at 847 West Riverside Drive, apartment 12C. Is the address on the note missing the West? Let me check the note. Yes, it just says 847 Riverside Drive. The driver took them to 847 East Riverside, which is a completely different building across town. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Oh my God! Are they okay? Are they hurt? They're frightened, but physically unharmed. Can you verify their identities? They say their names are Olivia and Mason Brennan. Yes. Yes, those are my niece and nephew. Where are they now? At the 19th Precinct Station. We need a guardian to come pick them up immediately. I grabbed my keys and wallet, not even pausing to change out of my pajama pants. The conference? It could burn. My precious niece and nephew were alone, terrified, because of Victoria's reckless, self-absorbed entitlement. The precinct station was a maelstrom of noise and activity when I arrived. I identified myself at the desk, and a stern-faced female officer led me to a small, stark room. There, on a hard bench, sat Olivia and Mason, holding hands. Olivia's face was streaked with tears, her small shoulders shaking, and Mason clutched a grubby stuffed dinosaur as if his very life depended on its faded comfort. Aunt Gwen! Olivia launched herself into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I held them both, the sheer terror of what might have happened fueling a wildfire of fury in my chest. You're safe now, I murmured, my voice thick. I've got you. Officer Mills reappeared, holding a clipboard. We need to document this incident. Can you explain your relationship to these children? I'm their maternal aunt. Their mother is my sister. The words felt heavy, tainted. And where is their mother? Her gaze was unwavering. I have no idea. The admission tasted bitter, a metallic tang on my tongue. She asked me to babysit this weekend. I told her no because I had work obligations. I had no knowledge she planned to send them anywhere. Officer Mills's expression hardened, her jaw tightening. So, she sent 2 minors alone in a taxi without confirming someone would be there to receive them. Apparently, that's child endangerment. We'll need to file a report. My phone buzzed. Victoria. I declined the call. It rang again, immediately. You should probably answer that, Officer Mills suggested, her tone laced with implication. I picked up. What the hell did you do? Victoria's voice shrieked through the receiver, raw with outrage. Finally! Where are my kids? The taxi driver said he dropped them off hours ago. They're at a police station, I stated, my voice dangerously calm. Because he put them in a cab to an address that doesn't exist. Silence. Then, a bewildered, what are you talking about? I sent them to your apartment. I live at 847 West Riverside Drive, apartment 12C. You wrote down 847 Riverside Drive with no east or west designation. The driver took them to a completely different building on the other side of town. One that doesn't even have a 12C. Did you even bother to verify the address before you shoved your children into a taxi alone? And what taxi company accepts unaccompanied minors without questioning it? Don't you dare lecture me. This is your fault for not agreeing to help. Officer Mills held out her hand for my phone. I gave it to her. Mrs. Brennan, she began, her voice crisp and authoritative. This is Officer Garrett Mills with the NYPD. Your children were found abandoned on the sidewalk in Manhattan. We're filing a child endangerment report. You need to return to the city immediately. I couldn't hear Victoria's frantic response, but the officer's expression suggested it wasn't cooperative. That's not optional, ma'am. If you fail to return within 24 hours, we'll be forwarding this case to Child Protective Services. She ended the call and handed back my phone. The next several hours blurred into a tedious parade of statements, paperwork, and calls. I contacted Nathan directly, who was horrified, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage, when he learned of Victoria's actions. I never would have gone along with this if I'd known, he seethed. We're coming back right now. Then Dorothy called, her voice screeching about how I was tearing our family apart. Your daughter, I articulated, each word a cold, hard stone. Put 2 children in a taxi to a wrong address and left them on a street corner alone in New York City. I'm not the villain here. You refused to help. What was she supposed to do? Find a responsible babysitter? Hire a service? Cancel her trip? Literally anything except endanger her own children? You've always been jealous of Victoria. I hung up. The CPS investigation launched within 48 hours. A caseworker, Teresa Montgomery, contacted me for a full statement. I provided everything: phone records showing Victoria's demands and my refusal, the police report, witness statements from the horrified neighbors who found the children, and the taxi company's records confirming the driver had been given an incomplete address. The taxi company, too, was under investigation for accepting unaccompanied minors without proper authorization, but that was a separate battle. Nathan filed for divorce 3 weeks later. He'd retained a ruthless family law attorney, seeking primary custody based on Victoria's undeniable negligence. The police report became Exhibit A. Victoria spiraled. She called me, screaming, blaming me for the destruction of her marriage and for turning everyone against her. Dorothy, predictably, rallied to her defense, inundating me with long text messages about sacred family loyalty and the importance of forgiveness. Those children could have been kidnapped, trafficked, or killed. I texted back, my fingers flying. There is no forgiving that level of recklessness. Kenneth, my father, called next, a rare occurrence as he usually allowed Dorothy to navigate the choppy waters of family drama. Your mother is very upset. Victoria endangered her own children because I wouldn't drop everything for her convenience. I countered, my voice flat. I have nothing to apologize for. She made a mistake. She made a choice. Mistakes are accidents. This was a deliberate disregard for her children's safety. He sighed heavily. Your sister needs support right now. Her children needed protection. That's what's more important. The custody battle stretched over 4 grueling months. Nathan's attorney was relentless, meticulously documenting every instance of Victoria's neglectful behavior. The time she left Mason in a hot car, the afternoon she forgot Olivia at school, the incident where she let the kids play unsupervised near a busy street while absorbed in her phone. Between the initial police report and the final custody hearing, my life became consumed by legal proceedings and a brutal family war. Dorothy launched a full-scale campaign against me, calling every relative, every distant acquaintance, to spin her twisted version of events. In her narrative, I was a bitter, childless woman who had weaponized a single mistake to steal my sister's children out of sheer jealousy. Our Aunt Patricia, Dorothy's younger sister, called me one Wednesday evening. Your mother is beside herself. She can barely get out of bed. Her grandchildren were left alone on a Manhattan street corner. I replied, my voice steady. Perhaps her priorities are misplaced. Victoria said you refused to help out of spite. Victoria asked me to babysit with an hour's notice. I had work commitments. I said no, which is my right as an adult with my own life. She then committed a crime by endangering her children. Family helps family, Gwen. Family doesn't endanger children. There's a difference between helping and being bulldozed. Patricia hung up on me. She wasn't the last. Over the following weeks, a torrent of messages from cousins, family friends, and people I barely remembered meeting poured in. All of them had been fed Victoria's narrative, portraying her as the hapless victim of my cruelty. I stopped defending myself after a while. The people who mattered knew the truth. Everyone else could believe whatever comforting fiction they chose. My job became a refuge during those months. My supervisor, Angela Martinez, called me into her office after noticing my distraction during meetings. Everything okay? You seem stressed. I gave her the abbreviated version. Her expression shifted from concern to righteous outrage. She put kids in a cab to a wrong address? And now you're the villain for reporting it? That's insane. You potentially saved those kids' lives. Angela leaned back in her chair. Take whatever time you need for court dates or meetings. We'll work around it. That quiet kindness meant everything during a period when my own family was treating me like a pariah. The preliminary custody hearing happened on a gray October morning. Nathan's attorney, Diane Foster, a woman as sharp as cut glass, had prepared me extensively. Victoria's team will try to discredit you. They'll suggest you're exaggerating or that you have ulterior motives. Stay calm, stick to facts, and don't let them bait you into emotional reactions. The courthouse was a formidable edifice of marble floors and echoing hallways. Victoria arrived with her attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making problems disappear. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Nathan squeezed my shoulder before we entered the courtroom. "Thank you for doing this. Those are my niece and nephew," I replied, my voice low. "I'd walk through fire for them." The hearing itself was brutal. Victoria's attorney painted her as a devoted mother who'd merely made an error in judgment during a stressful time. He emphasized her volunteer work at the kids' school, her involvement in their activities, the stable home environment she supposedly provided. When Diane called me to testify, Victoria's attorney objected to nearly everything I said, attempting to silence me. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, overruled most of the objections, allowing my truth to finally emerge. "Ms. Mitchell, please describe the events of October 15th. I walked through it methodically, the conference I'd registered for months prior, Victoria's last-minute demand, my clear refusal and the reasons why. The chilling phone call from Officer Mills. Finding Olivia and Mason, small and terrified, at the police station. "Did Mrs. Brennan confirm your address before sending the children?" Diane asked. "No. If she had, she would have realized the address doesn't exist as she wrote it down." "Did she inform you she was sending them despite your refusal?" "No. I had no knowledge they were coming until the police called." Victoria's attorney rose. For cross-examination, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Miss Mitchell, isn't it true that you've always resented your sister's success?" "No." "You're not jealous that she has a family while you're single and childless?" Diane objected immediately. Judge Morrison sustained it. "Counsel, stick to relevant questions. Miss Mitchell, how many times have you watched your niece and nephew in the past?" "Dozens of times over the years." "So you've established a pattern of helping your sister with childcare." "I've helped when my schedule allowed and when I was asked with reasonable notice, and on this occasion, you chose work over family." "I chose a professional commitment I'd made months in advance over a last-minute demand that ignored my clearly stated boundaries." He tried several more angles, all attempting to frame me as the unreasonable party. But the police report was damning. Officer Mills's testimony about finding 2 small children abandoned on a sidewalk was worse. The taxi company's record showing Victoria had given an incorrect address sealed it. Judge Morrison ordered a full custody evaluation. "These are serious allegations. I want a comprehensive assessment of both parents' capability before making any determinations." The evaluation process spanned 6 agonizing weeks. Nathan and Victoria both underwent psychological assessments, home visits, and interviews with court-appointed evaluators. The kids were interviewed separately by a child psychologist specializing in custody cases. I wasn't part of the official evaluation, but Olivia later confided what the psychologist had asked. She wanted to know if we felt safe with Mom. I told her about the time Mom left Mason in the car and he couldn't get out because the child locks were on. What did she say? She wrote it down and asked me more questions about other times we felt scared or worried. Mason, it turned out, had told the psychologist about an incident at a playground where Victoria had been so absorbed in her phone that he'd climbed to the top of equipment meant for older kids and fallen, breaking his arm. Victoria's version had been that she'd looked away for seconds. Mason's account made it clear she'd been distracted for nearly 15 minutes. The evaluator's report was devastating for Victoria. It documented a consistent pattern of neglectful behavior, a prioritization of her own wants over the children's needs, and minimal awareness of age-appropriate supervision requirements. The taxi incident was explicitly labeled as demonstrating a severe lapse in judgment and disregard for child safety. I received a subpoena for the final custody hearing. This one would determine the actual arrangement going forward, not just temporary measures. Nathan's parents flew in from Oregon. I'd met them a few times over the years, kind, gentle people who clearly adored their grandchildren. His mother, Carol, hugged me fiercely when she saw me in the courthouse hallway. "Nathan told us everything you did. Thank you for protecting our grandbabies." His father, Robert, shook my hand firmly. "Takes guts to stand up to family. We're grateful." Their support bolstered me. At least some people recognized this wasn't about revenge or jealousy. It was about two vulnerable children who deserved adults that put their safety first. Victoria took the stand first. Her attorney had coached her well. She cried at appropriate moments, spoke tearfully about her love for her children, and insisted the taxi incident had been a one-time mistake born of desperation and poor judgment. "I thought I was sending them to my sister's apartment," she whimpered. "I would never intentionally put my children at risk. It was a terrible error, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "Mrs. Brennan?" Diane asked during cross-examination, her voice deceptively soft. "Can you speak to the other incidents mentioned in the evaluation report? Those are misunderstandings or exaggerations," Victoria claimed, her composure wavering. "The car incident was less than 5 minutes while I ran into a store for milk. The playground fall was an accident that could happen to any parent. I'm being crucified for normal parenting challenges. You left a 5-year-old locked in a car in 70-degree weather for what emergency services records indicate was actually 18 minutes. Victoria's facade cracked. "I lost track of time. People make mistakes. These aren't mistakes, Mrs. Brennan. They're patterns. A mistake is forgetting to pack a lunch. Leaving a child trapped in a hot vehicle is negligence." When I testified again, I focused on specific incidents I'd witnessed firsthand. The time Victoria had shown up 2 hours late to pick up the kids from my place because she decided to get a massage. The afternoon she promised to take them to the zoo but bailed because a friend invited her to brunch instead. The countless instances where she treated them as inconveniences rather than responsibilities. "Do you believe your sister is incapable of caring for her children?" Victoria's attorney asked during cross-examination, a final attempt to undermine my credibility. "I believe she's capable but unwilling to prioritize them over her own desires. That makes her dangerous to their well-being." "That's quite an accusation against your own sister." "It's an observation based on years of watching her treat those kids as accessories to her lifestyle rather than human beings who depend on her for their survival." Judge Morrison's ruling came 3 weeks later. Nathan was granted primary physical custody. Victoria received supervised visitation, pending completion of parenting courses and psychological counseling. The judge's written opinion included stark language about a demonstrable pattern of neglect and fundamental failure to prioritize child safety. The supervised visits would be monitored by a professional, a retired social worker named Mr. Graham Clark, whom Nathan hired specifically for this purpose. Clark, with his 15 years of experience, would not tolerate manipulation or inappropriate behavior during visitation time. Victoria blamed me for all of it. Dorothy stopped speaking to me entirely, a silent, icy judgment. Kenneth would occasionally send brief texts asking how I was doing, but the family unit had fractured beyond repair. The aftermath of the custody ruling created shockwaves I hadn't fully anticipated. Victoria's social circle turned on her almost immediately. Other mothers at the kids' school had heard about the court case, and suddenly, the woman who'd been hosting elaborate birthday parties and organizing fundraisers was being excluded from playdate groups and PTA committees. She blamed me for that too, naturally, as if I had any control over how other parents reacted to learning she'd endangered her own children. My coworker, Jennifer, stopped by my desk about a month after the ruling. "I saw you mentioned in some Facebook group, parents talking about a custody case." My stomach sank. "What were they saying?" "Just that someone local had lost custody for child endangerment. No names mentioned, but the details were specific enough that people were speculating." She paused. "Look, I know you've been dealing with family stuff. If anyone here gives you grief about it, let me know." "Thanks. I appreciate it." The speculation didn't bother me as much as it probably should have. Let people talk. The court documents were public record for anyone determined enough to look. What truly mattered was that Olivia and Mason were in a safer environment. Nathan invited me to his apartment for dinner that first week after getting primary custody. The place looked different already, more organized, more structured. He'd implemented consistent routines for homework, meals, and bedtime. There was a chore chart on the refrigerator and a calendar marking important dates. "They're adjusting better than I expected," he said, as the kids played quietly in the living room. "Olivia seems more relaxed. Mason's sleeping through the night again. They know they're safe now. That makes all the difference." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion etched on his face. "Victoria's attorney is already filing motions to modify the visitation order. She wants unsupervised time." "Already? She hasn't even started the mandated counseling yet." "I know. Diane says it won't go anywhere, but it's going to be a constant battle." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "I need to ask you something. Anything. Would you be willing to be listed as an emergency guardian? If something happens to me, I want to make sure the kids don't default back to Victoria." The weight of his request settled over me. "You're sure? That's a huge responsibility. You're the only person I trust completely with them. You've already proven you'll put their safety above everything else, even your own family relationships." "Then yes. Absolutely yes." We completed the paperwork that week. I became the designated guardian in the event Nathan was incapacitated or deceased. Victoria would have contested it if she'd known, but Nathan's attorney assured us it was legally sound given the custody arrangement. Dorothy found out somehow and left me a voicemail that dripped with venom. "You're trying to steal those children permanently. What kind of monster turns against her own blood like this?" "The kind who watched those same children nearly become trafficking statistics because their mother couldn't be bothered to write down a complete address," I thought, but didn't say. I deleted the message without responding. Work became my sanctuary during this period. I threw myself into projects, volunteered for extra assignments, and built relationships with colleagues who knew nothing of my family trauma. Angela recommended me for a promotion, which I received 3 months after the custody hearing. "You've been through hell," she told me during our celebratory lunch. "But you've never let it affect your work quality. That's impressive. Work is the one place where things make sense," I replied. "Performance reviews are based on actual merit, not who can manipulate emotions better. Family issues, something like that?" She didn't press. It was refreshing to have professional boundaries respected after months of Victoria and Dorothy acting like my refusal to enable their dysfunction was a personal attack. The supervised visitation started 2 months after the ruling. Nathan hired Graham, the retired social worker. He'd seen everything and didn't tolerate nonsense from parents trying to manipulate situations. Olivia told me about the first supervised visit. "Mom cried a lot. She kept saying the mean judge didn't understand and that Dad was turning us against her." "How did that make you feel?" "Confused. We're not against her. We just want her to be safe with us. Mr. Graham told her she needed to focus on activities with us instead of talking about the court case." "Good. What did you end up doing?" "We went to the park. Mom stayed on her phone most of the time, but at least we were together." The pattern continued. Victoria would show up for her supervised hours but spend most of the time either complaining about the situation or being too distracted to genuinely engage with the kids. Graham's reports reflected this, noting that she appeared physically present but emotionally disconnected from the children. Nathan shared the reports with me. "This isn't getting better. If anything, she's getting worse." "What does Diane say?" "That it strengthens our case if she tries to modify custody, but it also means the kids aren't getting the relationship with their mother that they deserve." That was the tragedy underneath everything. Olivia and Mason loved Victoria despite her flaws. They wanted a mother who'd show up for them, who'd prioritize their needs, who'd demonstrate growth and change. Instead, they got someone still playing the victim and refusing to take accountability. The parenting classes Victoria was required to complete were held twice weekly for 12 weeks. Nathan received copies of the attendance records. She missed 4 sessions in the first month alone, always with excuses about conflicting appointments or not feeling well. The coordinator warned her that excessive absences would result in failure to complete the program. She started attending more regularly after that, but her participation was minimal. The instructor's notes mentioned that Victoria demonstrates resistance to feedback and appears to view the requirement as punitive rather than educational. Her psychological evaluation was even more concerning. The therapist's report described her as having narcissistic tendencies with poor insight into her own behavior and limited capacity for empathy, particularly regarding her children's emotional needs. The recommendation was for ongoing individual therapy at least once per week for a minimum of 6 months before unsupervised visitation could be considered. Victoria called me after receiving that report, the first time we'd spoken directly since the custody hearing. "Are you happy now? They're calling me a narcissist who can't love her own children. They're calling you someone who needs help. There's a difference. This is all your fault. If you just watched them that weekend, none of this would have happened. If you'd accepted my no like an adult, none of this would have happened. If you'd verified an address before sending children alone across the city, none of this would have happened. If you'd prioritized their safety over your vacation, none of this would have happened. You made choices, Victoria. These are the consequences. I hate you," she shrieked. "I can live with that." She hung up. Kenneth called 20 minutes later. "Your sister is devastated. Your grandchildren could have been dead." I reminded him, my voice flat. "I'm not sure why everyone keeps losing sight of that fact. Nobody's losing sight of anything, but she's trying to get better. Can't you acknowledge that? She's going through motions because a court ordered her to. That's not the same as genuine change. When she starts showing actual insight and accountability, I'll acknowledge progress." The months dragged on. Victoria completed her parenting classes with minimal passing scores. She attended therapy, but according to her therapist's reports to the court, showed limited engagement with the process. Her supervised visitations remained inconsistent in quality. I started taking the kids 1 weekend per month to give Nathan a much-needed break during this period. We'd go to museums, catch movies, or just hang out at my apartment, playing board games and making elaborate meals together. Those weekends became highlights for all of us. During one of these visits, Mason asked me a question that broke my heart. "Aunt Gwen, why doesn't Mom like us as much as she likes her friends?" "Oh, buddy," I said, pulling him close. "She loves you very much. Then why does she always look at her phone instead of playing with us? And why did she put us in that taxi alone?" I was really scared. I pulled him into a fierce hug. Some adults have a hard time showing love in the right ways. That's not your fault or about how lovable you are. It's about stuff she needs to work on inside herself. Are you going to send us away, too? His voice was a tiny, trembling whisper. "Never," I vowed, holding him tighter. "I will always be here for you and your sister. That's a promise." Olivia, who'd been pretending not to listen, came over and joined the hug. "We know, Aunt Gwen. You're the only grown-up who doesn't break promises." One Friday evening, about 4 months after the custody ruling, Nathan brought the kids to my apartment for dinner. My real apartment, the right address, 847 West Riverside Drive, apartment 12C. The one Victoria had never bothered to write down completely. "Aunt Gwen, we made you something at school," Olivia said, presenting a construction paper card covered in crayon hearts. Mason hugged my legs. "We missed you." "I missed you too, buddy." Nathan pulled me aside while the kids settled in to watch a movie. "Thank you for everything you did. I know it cost you your relationship with your parents. Those kids deserve someone to protect them. That's all that mattered." Victoria's attorney is pushing for modified custody again. Claims she's completed all the court requirements. My stomach tightened. What do you think will happen? The judge will probably grant limited unsupervised visitation eventually. Short visits, gradually increasing if there are no incidents. He rubbed his face tiredly. I can't keep them from their mother forever, but I can make damn sure she never gets the chance to be that careless again. The modified custody arrangement went into effect 8 months after the original ruling. Victoria was allowed unsupervised visits every other weekend, starting with just daytime hours and gradually building to overnights if she maintained appropriate standards. The court kept Mr. Graham Clark available for spot checks and required Victoria to maintain her therapy sessions. I held my breath every time the kids went to her house. Nathan did too. He'd installed tracking apps on their phones and made them promise to call him immediately if anything felt wrong or unsafe. Nothing catastrophic happened, but the small, insidious incidents continued. Victoria would forget to pack Mason's allergy medication. She'd schedule activities during Olivia's homework time, then blame the school when grades slipped. She promised trips to museums or parks and then spend the day shopping instead, leaving the kids bored and disappointed. Nathan documented everything. His attorney assured him that if Victoria demonstrated a pattern of continued negligence, they could petition for modified custody again. I saw the kids regularly. Nathan had me listed as an emergency contact, and I picked them up from school when he had late meetings. Olivia had started calling me for advice about friend drama and school projects. Mason would randomly FaceTime me to show me his latest Lego creation or tell me about something funny that happened at recess. They were thriving despite everything. That was all that mattered. Victoria's animosity toward me never faded. Family gatherings became battlegrounds, with her making pointed comments about how I'd stolen her children's love or poisoned them against her. I stopped responding. Her narrative required my participation, and I refused to give it. Dorothy's health declined over the next year, lung cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. She refused to speak to me, even as Kenneth urged her to make peace with both daughters before it was too late. She wants Victoria there. Kenneth told me on the phone. She keeps asking for her. And I'm sure Victoria is providing wonderful support. I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Please don't be like this. She's dying. I'm not stopping anyone from doing anything, but I'm also not pretending the past didn't happen for the sake of a deathbed reconciliation that Dorothy doesn't even want. Dorothy passed on a Tuesday morning. Victoria called me, shrieking that I'd killed our mother with stress and cruelty. Kenneth just sounded tired when he asked me to please come to the funeral and tried to keep the peace. I went. I sat in the back. I didn't speak to Victoria or engage when she made a scene about me having the audacity to show my face. I paid my respects to Kenneth and left. Nathan texted me later. The kids wanted me to tell you they're proud of you for going. They know it was hard. That message meant more than anything Dorothy could have said. Life moved forward, the way it always does. Nathan's divorce from Victoria was finalized about 18 months after the initial custody ruling. She fought for spousal support and got a minimal amount, given the circumstances. 2 years after that, Victoria remarried a surgeon named Philip, who seemed decent enough from a distance. She had another baby, a daughter named Claire. The court allowed regular overnight visits with Olivia and Mason by then, though Nathan maintained strict boundaries and documentation. I got promoted at work, started dating someone who actually respected my time and boundaries, and built a life that wasn't centered around managing Victoria's chaos or seeking Dorothy's approval. Olivia graduated middle school last spring. She gave a speech as class president about resilience and the importance of people who stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. She looked directly at me when she said it. After the ceremony, she hugged me tight. Thank you for not letting anything bad happen to us. Always, sweetheart. No matter what. Victoria was there with Philip and Claire, maintaining her distance. She looked like she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Good. We had nothing left to discuss. Mason started middle school this fall. He joined the chess club and the debate team. Nathan jokes that he's going to be a lawyer someday, probably specializing in family law. The kid has a sense of justice that won't quit. I took them both out for ice cream last weekend. Just us. Olivia told me about a boy she likes. Mason showed me a paper he'd written about personal heroes, for which he'd chosen Nathan for getting primary custody and me for calling the police that Saturday morning. That's quite an honor, I said, my throat tight. You saved us, he said simply. That makes you a hero. Your dad did the hard part. You did the scary part. Dad says telling the truth when family doesn't want you to is the hardest thing anyone can do. Smart kid. Nathan's raising them right. Victoria sent me a message last week. The first direct contact in almost 3 years. The kids' therapist says they need me to be more present. This is your fault. They never would have needed therapy if you hadn't interfered. I blocked her number. Some people will never accept responsibility for their own actions. That's their prison to live in, not mine. Kenneth calls occasionally. He's gotten older, frielier. He admits now that he should have stood up to Dorothy more, should have protected me better when we were young. I appreciate the acknowledgement, even if it doesn't change the past. Victoria asks about you sometimes. He mentioned during our last conversation. What does she ask? If you're happy, if you ever think about reconciling. I am happy. And no, I don't think about reconciling. You can tell her I said so. She made mistakes. She made choices. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. You turned out stronger than any of us expected. I turned out exactly as strong as I needed to be. Sometimes I think about that Saturday morning when Officer Mills called. How my entire life pivoted on Victoria's assumption that I'd comply even after saying no. How she'd valued her vacation more than taking 2 extra minutes to write down a complete address. How close we came to tragedy because one person refused to hear boundaries. I don't regret any of it. The family fracture, the lost relationships, Dorothy's resentment, Victoria's hatred, all of it was worth it because Olivia and Mason are safe. They grew up knowing someone would protect them, even when it cost that person everything. That's what love actually looks like, not the conditional, transactional affection Dorothy offered or the entitled demands Victoria made. Real love that shows up when it's hard and stays even when everyone else walks away. Olivia wants me to help her shop for high school next summer. Mason asked if I'd teach him to drive when he turns 16. Nathan invited me to Thanksgiving with his parents, who now treat me like extended family. I'd built something better than what I lost. A chosen family that respects boundaries and values safety. A life where I'm not constantly bracing for the next crisis or demand. Victoria can hate me forever. It changes nothing. I'll still be here when those kids need me, keeping them safe from whatever comes next, including their own mother's dysfunction if necessary. That's a promise I made in a police station all those years ago. And it's one I'll keep until the day I die.